In 1982, on the 30th of December, right between Christmas and New Year's Eve, a little girl named Katie Beers was born in the town of Mastic Beach, Long Island. But to people familiar with this case, she's ended up being known as the girl in the wall.
Tell me something.
He threw me on the bed.
I just want my daughter back. Please bring her back.
And then I was screaming my brains out.
I heard her say a man was coming after her with a knife, and she said, oh my God, here he comes.
He started kissing me.
Our biggest concern is that we find this child, well and safe.
My hand hit a nail.
The last time I seen her was when she was walking towards the machine. I started getting scared.
Then he locks me in that little cubby hole.
Kidnapped, assaulted, trapped, and chained up, 9-year-old Katie Beers was abandoned by her mom, then used as a slave by her godmother and her sexually deviant husband before eventually getting kidnapped and trapped in an underground dungeon. For over 3 weeks, the Long Island police dug deep into this menagerie of characters, each more suspicious than the next, in hopes of getting their hands on the captive 9-year-old.
She's behind the wall. If she's behind the wall, she's not alive.
But to their surprise, she was already at it. She knew how to save herself.
She tried every strategy she could to make him change his mind and ultimately prevailed. This little girl at 10 years old changed a kidnapper's mind.
In the small hamlet of Bay Shore, Long Island, busy little girl Katie is living a Cinderella-like existence. Since her mother abandoned her, she has been enslaved by her godmother, Linda, and her husband, Sal.
I was their servant, whether it was to do the laundry, to clean the bathrooms, to cook dinner. That was my purpose to her growing up. I was pretty much her slave.
But her service to Linda was the least of her concern, since the real monster in that house was none other than her own uncle.
From the time that I was 2 years old, I was sexually abused by my godmother's husband.
When she was 7 years old, Katie had enough and she tried to tell her godmother the truth about her husband, but her reaction only made it worse.
She told me that I was a liar and to get out of her face.
Katie wasn't allowed to attend school and grew up completely isolated. The only friend she had was John Esposito, the typical family friend. But to her, their relationship was special.
I really didn't have any friends my own age. I think in my childhood, the thing that probably made me the happiest was when I got to spend time with John. I would say I loved him. He was always a confidant, somebody that I would trust.
Amid all of the abuse she already had to go through, Katie's life was about to take a turn for the worse.
2 days before my 10th birthday, I was abducted.
On that day, Katie was left with John, and together they went to Spaceplex, her favorite place in all of Long Island.
At Spaceplex, you could ride motorcycles, shoot baskets, or even ride a dinosaur.
For my 10th birthday, it was going to be just Big John and I.
John was nicknamed Big John by the local kids because he was a well-known member of the Big Brother, Big Sister program.
Whenever we would go to Spaceplex, I was happy. There was never really a care. There were kids running all over the place.
But her birthday would soon turn sour as the worst thing that could ever happen to a child came to be.
It was a man kidnapped me and he had a knife. Oh no, here he comes. I gotta go.
Katie.
That voice calling out Katie's name is Linda, her godmother. But while she was contacting the police, they were already on the scene with Big John at Spaceplex. They evacuated the site and searched for the rest of the day, but all of these efforts were in vain.
He picked me up and carried me into the closet where I realized he was opening up a door to expose a tunnel.
Whoever got their hands on her was an extremely apt individual. That tunnel was set up behind the walls of his house and carefully crafted by an expert. Katie was forced to crawl until she reached a trap door.
And then he exposes this hole and he opens up this door into this room. The only word that I have to describe this room was a dungeon, a place that I couldn't escape.
Inside, Katie saw a dirty mattress and a makeshift soundproof casket surrounded by chains.
My captor looked at me and said, "This is your home now."
I heard her say a man was coming after her with a knife, and she said, oh my God, here he comes. So by the time I picked up the phone to talk to her, I got nothing.
This is all of what the godmother, Linda, had to say about the ominous call she received on the day of the abduction. This was enough to concern Dominic Verone, the head of the Long Island Police Kidnapping Division.
By the time she gets to the machine, Katie had already hung up. That disturbed me because there's been a lot of times when these abductions are not really abductions. They're made to look like abductions.
You saw this young girl around?
As over 95% of kidnappings are actually perpetrated by close family members. But this wasn't the only unusual thing about that call.
It just struck me as not believable. And I immediately was disturbed by the fact that a 9-year-old child would use the word kidnap. Also, how does a 9-year-old child get away from an abductor and able to use the telephone?
But he had to put his suspicions on the side for now. The priority was Katie, as every minute counted in that kind of case. They needed to find her and fast.
As much as I was concerned about some of the problems with the call, you did hear a girl in distress. This girl was in danger.
There was absolutely no trace of Katie at Spaceplex, almost as if she was never there. The only clue they had was the recording of Katie's distressed call to Linda, so Verone decided to bring out the big guns.
We sent the audio tape of that telephone call, as well as the device that it was recorded on, to the FBI.
While he was waiting for the FBI, Verone continued his investigation. Naturally, he started by looking into the most likely suspects.
The main players were Marilyn Beers, the natural mother, a dysfunctional, incompetent mother, Linda Inghilleri, the godmother.
My main concern is to let people know how much I cared for her.
She was used by the godmother to run all kinds of errands. Sal Inghilleri had been charged with sexual abuse on Katie Beers.
The little girl don't want to live in Mastic Beach with her mother.
John Esposito, not a relative, but a family friend. He said something dirty happened.
The FBI eventually shared what they found with him. It seemed that Katie's call was made from a phone booth in front of Spaceplex, which is weird since they still had found no trace of her inside of the recreation center, and she apparently tried to call Linda 19 times before she decided to leave a message on her answering machine. But all of these clues were nothing compared to the result of the audio analysis the FBI carried out on the call.
I never forget the call I got from the scientists at the FBI lab, who gave me the next bit of breaking news. It wasn't actually Katie who broke free and made that call. It was a recording. It was someone who tape recorded Katie and wanted us to believe, or it to seem, that the call came from that telephone booth next to Spaceplex.
The detective was starting to put the pieces together, and it became evident that the culprit fooled them all. The kidnapping of Katie has been used as a front to something far more sinister.
The phone call was a scripted plot by an individual to make us think that Katie Beers was abducted.
Back at the dungeon, Katie knew what was going to happen and decided to fight as hard as she could. She noticed the door of the casket was loose and went at it.
Eventually, I had kicked it long enough and hard enough that snapped, and I was able to kind of safely exit.
To her, this was such a breakthrough she thought she may finally be able to find a way to escape, almost forgetting that the casket was itself inside of the dungeon.
Then I had nowhere to go. I remember trying to go on the shelf and see if there was anything there that I could use for some sort of self-defense. And there were a bunch of keys up there. So unknowingly, I grabbed one of those keys and hid it underneath the mattress.
Before she had the chance to try to come up with a way to confront him, she heard him coming. It was too late now, as the footsteps started to get louder and louder. As soon as he came down, he saw the door open, and then he raped her for the first time. For the rest of her time in captivity, her abductor would assault her multiple times every day, but out of respect for Katie, the details of her subsequent assaults won't be covered. Katie was able to have the TV on 24/7. It was on the news that she saw the police had figured out where the call had come from. They knew that it was pre-recorded. This information led the police to put together a few theories regarding Katie's whereabouts. There were still questions they had. Meanwhile, Katie was able to hear each of her family members' testimonies by watching the news, starting with Marilyn, her biological mother. Marilyn's plea was simple. She just wanted her daughter back. When Katie saw Marilyn on the news, she cried a lot because she could see in her mother's eyes that she had missed her and wanted her to be found. That gave Katie some relief and hope. Her mother was convinced that Linda and Sal were behind the kidnapping because they had lost custody of Katie after Marilyn filed charges against Sal for Katie's sexual abuse. Sal was seen on the news expressing his hope that Katie would be found safe. This angered Katie, as she felt that if anyone had a motive for her abduction or murder, it was Sal, who faced serious criminal charges for sexual abuse. However, Varone wasn't quick to jump to conclusions. He believed there were good reasons to suspect not only Marilyn but also that she might have tried to frame someone else for her alleged crime. Marilyn Beers, Katie's mother and Katie's brother Little John, became aware of what was happening with Katie. They had ample motive to set up an abduction to get her away from a bad situation. They could have walked her out, had Katie make the phone call, tape recorded it, placed it, and left John Esposito holding the bags. After a while, the investigation into the family members wore down. Each of them had solid alibis, and no clues were discovered at any of their residences. So, the police started to look into the last man on the list, the most unlikely suspect. The investigators retraced John Esposito's footsteps but encountered a gap of 30 minutes to an hour that they couldn't fully explain. They obtained a search warrant and conducted a full inspection of John Esposito's residence, but there was no evidence of a crime. The background check came in the next day and turned out to be extremely suspicious. Once they contacted the Big Brothers Big Sisters Association, the program the suspect proudly claimed to be a member of, they learned the dark truth about Big John. John Esposito painted himself as a big brother. Detectives discovered that he had tried to join that organization, but during their background investigation, they learned that he had been involved in the abduction of a 7-year-old child 15 years prior to Katie's disappearance. As a result, he was ruled out as being a big brother. The police ramped up the pressure on him, following him wherever he went. This caught the attention of the media, who also started scouring around his house. The police searched Esposito's property, including the main house and the converted garage where he actually lived. Katie knew that the #1 suspect was Esposito, as she could see the news crews camped out in front of his house. Eventually, it became clear that the kidnapper was, in fact, John Esposito, aka Big John. The man Katie called her best friend had been planning and scheming until the day he finally kidnapped her. Katie was relieved that the police finally got on the right track, but at this point, Varone didn't have anything to incriminate Esposito. Worse still, he had no idea what Esposito did with Katie. As each day went by, they became more convinced that they would find not a live Katie Beers, but her body. A few days later, Katie woke up in the dungeon. Esposito had put a chain around her neck. She realized that the key she had grabbed was for the padlock, allowing her to at least release herself. She counted the links of the chain and up to the wall so she could quickly chain herself up again when she heard Esposito coming. However, this happened less frequently as the police, convinced of his involvement, almost never left him alone. They kept an extremely tight surveillance schedule around him and his house, and Varone even went inside to interrogate him. Katie could see the concern drain out of Esposito's face, which disturbed and concerned her even more. Out of options, Esposito started making desperate requests to Katie, but she knew better. He asked her to play dead so he could take a picture to make the police believe she was dead. Katie, wise beyond her years, knew this could be her death sentence and refused. From that point on, Katie rarely slept and did not eat any food Esposito might have altered, fearing he might sedate her to get the photo he wanted. Katie decided to confront him, bombarding him with questions to make him realize the insanity behind his actions. She asked how she would go to school, survive, and have a future. Esposito always had witty remarks, suggesting she would do all those things with him, but Katie was disgusted. Esposito began to crack under the pressure of the overwhelming police presence, Verone constantly tailing him, and Katie's incessant questioning. He confided in her that he was planning to either end his life or run away. Katie knew that if she let this happen, he would probably kill her or leave her to die in the dungeon. Katie told him she wasn't feeling well, which combined with the police pressure and her questions, finally wore him down. Esposito spoke to his attorney, revealing, "I know where Katie is." He explained that she was behind the wall. This led Verone and everyone else involved to understand that John Esposito wasn't an ordinary kidnapper, but an actual mastermind. Esposito escorted police and the district attorney through the steps of unearthing the dungeon. They watched incredulously as he went through a 30-plus step process to reveal the dungeon he had built. There was a bookshelf on wheels to pull out, vinyl on the floor to move, and a 200-pound concrete block to lift with a block and tackle from the garage. Dropping down about 7 feet into the underground chamber, they found the passageway leading to the chamber where Katie was kept. Katie realized she had played in this dungeon while it was being built. Esposito had envisioned it specifically for kidnapping her. When Verone finally broke in, Katie couldn't believe it. The door opened and a man she didn't recognize said, "We're the police. You're safe now." Katie was overjoyed that she was alive, and Verone was similarly surprised, but for different reasons. He was amazed to see a 9-year-old who looked like she had just come back from a trip to the movies, sitting on the sofa, bubbly and upbeat. They knew from that moment that she was a survivor. In the hands of the police, Katie revealed the truth about what happened. John Esposito confessed to everything and was convicted of kidnapping in the first degree, sentenced to 15 years to life. The detective not only saved her from Esposito but also uncovered the abuse she had suffered at the hands of those supposed to care for her. Katie was placed into foster care, which was salvation for her. She had a mom, a dad, and siblings, making her feel part of a wonderful family. The legal procedures against her uncle Sal continued, and he was successfully put behind bars. Katie will always be grateful to Verone, who saved her in more ways than one. For 17 days she was his life, and he never gave up. Katie cherishes the relationship she has with him. Verone wrote Katie a letter when it was all over. "Dear Catherine, I don't know you very well, but what I do know is enough to show you as a remarkable young girl with a strong determination to live. My only wish is that we could have found you sooner and that you didn't have to be down there so long. Not many adults could endure or survive what you went through. Be proud and continue to be strong. I know you will be successful." Katie became a true survivor, refusing to let her past bring her down. Instead, she achieved everything she ever hoped for. She has 2 parents who love her, a husband, 2 kids, and a wonderful family. She liberated herself from her past and is now a best-selling author working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Katie wants every survivor of any kind of abuse to know that they are more than what happened to them. She was determined not to let her childhood traumas affect her adulthood. They shaped her into who she is, but do not define her.